Welcome everybody to our San Francisco Bay Area Coalition's training series. My name is Berta McDonald, and I'm on the steering committee of the Bay Area Coalition. And I thank you all for joining us today. And we are thrilled that you are here for this great persuasion training with Arizona State Assembly member Laura Terech. I'd also like to thank my BAC partners, Judith Boker and Susan Boley, as well as Margaret Partlow for helping with this event. But first, a few housekeeping items to make sure we stay on schedule and so everyone can hear. We'll keep you muted until you've been recognized. And for questions and comments, please use the chat function. We'll be monitoring the chat and we'll answer questions there, or we will call on you as well. But before we start, a little bit about the Bay Area Coalition. We are a group of 45 grassroots organizations and Democratic county committees who got together to support each other in our work at organizing phone banks, canvassing efforts, and voter registration drives. To learn all about us, please check out the link to our website, which Judith will be posting in chat. And we invite you to take action with us. We are holding phone banks every Wednesday and Saturday. Our focus is on California's Central Valley, Arizona, and Nevada. And we are and we also have many canvassing and voter registration opportunities available in the Central Valley's congressional districts 22 and 13 throughout the electoral season, including some trips to Nevada and Arizona too. But so everywhere. And if you scan the QR code on the slide here, it will cue you to all of our events, or there will be links in chat as well for that. And we have more trainings lined up for you. For those wanting to test canvassing waters, we offer a training every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. where you can learn all about the tools we use and what it takes to canvass. And on Thursday, June 20th, we'll offer a similar training for those new to phone banking or volunteers who haven't phone banked in a while and may need a little refresher. We are also offering a great training connecting with voters on abortion led by Jillian McLeod Tariff. And as you all know, protecting our reproductive rights is one of the biggest motivating issues for voters this fall. So I hope you can join us for this training. It will be held on June 24th to mark the anniversary of the Dobbs decision. And we also welcome Kathy Walsh. She will guide us through her active listening workshop. Listening is a very powerful tool we can use to make a strong connection with voters, and we hope you can join us for this training on July 11th. And I also invite you to use our Bay Area Coalition messaging library. It's a super helpful tool to use when talking to voters based on the guiding principles behind the focus group tested Values Villains Vision 3V's messaging framework, and it was developed by Anat Schenker Osorio. And to learn how to make the most of this amazing library while developing useful messaging skills, Natalie Burdick of Sister District and Swing Left San Francisco will offer the Messaging That Wins Hearts and Minds training on Thursday, July 11th. And finally, as part of our speaker series, we are excited to host political analyst and Hopium Chronicles author Simon Rosenberg on July 25th. Please sign up to attend this special event, and Judith is posting all the links in chat for all the events that we are promoting here. Or you can also scan this QR sign and you can, it'll take us to our website and all the sign up links. But now I would like to introduce you to Laura Terech. Some of you may remember working to help elect her to Arizona State Legislature in 22. She won, which is great, and Laura now serves as the State House Representative for Arizona's Legislative District 4. In addition to her role as a training and community outreach director for the nonprofit, nonpartisan organization Civic Engagement Beyond Voting, which was co-founded by Kathy Sigmund, who's also here helping us today, Laura is a proud product of Arizona Public Schools, including the University of Arizona and Arizona State University. After earning her master's degree in education, she taught kindergarten in a Title I school district, later going on to work on both federal and local campaigns. She sits on the House Education Committee and serves as the ranking Democrat on the House Elections Committee. Her experience campaigning for office, knocking on doors, and talking to voters led her to develop this amazing training with the organization I mentioned above, and on how to bring voters to your side. So please, thank you so much for being here with us today, and please welcome Laura.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I am so excited to see you all and to give this training. We'll have a bunch of folks collecting questions in the chat, and we will definitely have time for those at the end. We also have a toolkit that accompanies this training, so you'll be able to refer to that afterwards. So as they mentioned, I serve as the Training and Community Outreach Director with the wonderful organization Civic Engagement Beyond Voting. We help people engage with local government here in Arizona. And then I'm also a State House member here. A little bit about my metrics, I suppose. I have knocked approximately 8,000 doors at this point, and I've made 19,000 phone calls. I served on Governor Hobbs's bipartisan elections task force. I won in a district with a voter registration advantage of 20,000 people for the Republicans. And 2 of the 3 biggest pieces of bipartisan policy that Governor Hobbs passed in her first 2 years resulted as part of my work with one of my colleagues across the aisle. So I say all that to let you know that I have some experience in bringing people my way, and in listening, and how to really find common ground and use that to make positive change. So I'm excited to share these essential tools and tips with you. So let me pop open my screen and we'll get started. But if you do have questions, please do ask them in the chat, and we'll have time to get to those at the end. So here is what we will cover tonight. We'll talk about the power of conversation and deep canvassing, how to get started, which can often be the most difficult part. We'll go through the 10 essential tools in the Persuasion toolbox, and then end with tips and questions. Now, this training is about canvassing. It is designed for door-to-door interactions, but these skills are applicable to any political conversation, whether that's, phone banking or just talking with a friend, an acquaintance, a family member. So that will be a part of it as well. And I want to kick us off with a video from Anandrat Haradas.
Many people around the world will remember a very important night in early November 2008 when Barack Obama won the presidency. And less remembered, because of the upswell of joy of that night for many people, was a really bad thing also happened that night, which is that gay marriage lost a ballot referendum in California. It had been legalized by the courts earlier that year, so it was legal for a few months. A bunch of people got marriage licenses that summer and early that fall, and then it was put to the ballot, and Californians rejected gay marriage. Californians. And these LGBTQ activists in that state started looking at the data as it came in, right? Ballot initiative, you now know every county, every street, you kind of know where you stand in a way that they didn't before. And the results were shocking. LA County in 2008 voted against gay marriage. And so for these activists, they suddenly had this revelation that they could no longer dismiss homophobia as some, right-wing extremist thing being peddled by, imposed on them by some right-wing people in Mississippi through the Senate. Or, their neighbors didn't think they were full human beings. Their neighbors in the most progressive places in the United States did not think they were full human beings. This incredibly brave group of activists in California, starting at the LA LGBT Center, set out to basically go door to door and start having conversations with those neighbors. Now, I should say, like all the things in the book, people only have to do this if this is the kind of thing they want to do. Like, every gay person does not need to go knocking on doors to find out about homophobia. This is purely voluntary. This is a group of hardcore activists who are like, no. Like, this is not just like some American Taliban, faction. Like, most people do not know who we are. What is going on? So they went door to door. And they first, in this kind of helter-skelter way that was over time formalized into a method, now a very rigorous method called deep canvassing, they just started having conversations with people, and they listened a lot. They built trust through listening, right? And they didn't call out as soon as they heard some bile. They're like, oh, that's some bile. You got any more bile? I got a huge bucket for your bile. Just like, give me spit out all your possible bile. I got another bucket in the car if you got more bile in you, right? Bile is finite, it turns out. People at some point have said all the homophobic things that can possibly occur to them. At some point they run out. They've gotten out of their system. They feel you've heard their complaints, their fears, their anxieties. And then the conversation begins. These canvassers, what they started to do was to look, they didn't try to implant their view in you. They tried to look for you to have potential sources of dissonance with your own view. Okay, so you're homophobic, but perhaps you see yourself as someone who's a kind of champion of underdogs. You've supported the Mets your whole life. You always pick the losing team. How does your self-image as someone who pulls for the little guy square with your punching down at gay people in your politics? Or you were once mistreated when you were a young woman at that law firm, the only one on that floor. How does your experience being treated that way as a woman square with what you were saying about trans people earlier in our conversation? This has now been scientifically verified, peer-reviewed studies, one of the most successful persuasion efforts going on in this country right now. It's slow. It takes half an hour to 45 minutes on the door. You know, they operate on the scale of hundreds and thousands, not millions. But they have done remarkable work in moving people by recognizing a basic truth. If I could leave you with one thing, these deep canvassers believe what all the persuaders in my book believe in different forms, which is that people are much more complicated than we realize. People are live Civil War battlefields for their own soul about all kinds of issues. And in a time of polarization and division and the temperature just being raised on everything, we forget that. We know we're complicated, but as soon as it's people on the far shore from us politically, we think they're monoliths. We think they're simple. We think their homophobia is the only story about them. Their Trump voting is the only story about them. Their anti-vax, anti-science stance is the only story about them. And it's not true. People are these roiling internal contests. They stand bravely at the door and tell you their big stance, but inside, there's something that almost narrowly defeated that stance for the kind of ownership of their heart. And what every single persuader that I wrote about in this book does is try to harness, try to arm and equip some of those buried, currently losing sides of their personality and pit them against the winning side of their personality. Pit the desire to be seen as a good person against their transphobia. Pit their desire to see their country as being the greatest country in the world, pit that against their miserliness on immigration, and so on and so forth.
I love that video. It never gets old about the power of deep canvassing, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So when we go door to door, when we do this, we are planting seeds, and it brings to mind the rule of 7, which is an old marketing concept that it's this idea that people need to hear something an average of 7 times before they're ready to make up their minds. And in the clutter of the social media era, those 7 touches also need to be thoughtful, intentional interactions. And having a face-to-face, one-on-one conversation with someone is the most effective thing you can do, one of the most effective touches. For undecided or lower information voters, this is, like I said, one of the most important seeds that we can plant. Something to know about some of these conversations is they might be awkward or they might not go the way that you'd hoped. However, it will very likely stick in that voter's mind that someone from a campaign cared enough to reach out. I have a friend who canvassed for US Senator, now US Senator Mark Kelly here in Arizona. And the person asked her, well, what has Mark Kelly ever done for me? And my friend replied, well, he sent me to your door to talk to you. And he wants to know what you think. And never underestimate the power of telling someone that and planting that seed that we do really care about them and want to know what they think. Now, all that being said, this can be really scary, and it's important to acknowledge that. So I want to share 2 things with you. The first is one of my favorite quotes. The thing about being brave is it doesn't come with the absence of fear and hurt. Bravery is the ability to look fear and hurt in the face and say, move aside, you are in the way. But I do have a helpful flow chart for you. Let's say you want to do this, great, go do it. But I'm scared. then do it scared. One of the best things you can do to get over that fear with canvassing is just practice, like so many things, But it helps to get into the right mindset. So think about the person you're interacting with as a friend or a coworker. And before you ask anyone to give you their time, I want all of you on this call to think about why you're giving yours. Why are you doing this? Why are you giving up, an hour on a Wednesday night to learn about this? And I'm sure countless more hours on the phones and in the heat at the doors. What about this moment matters to you? And why do you believe this election is so important? And when you hold on to your why, and when you hold on to what got you motivated to do this in the first place, even if you have an interaction that isn't great or a door that doesn't go well, this will motivate you to keep going to knock that next door. But let's go over some tips on starting off on the right foot. I always look for context clues as I'm coming up in the yard. Maybe they have little signs, maybe they have painted rocks. A lot of people still have those from the pandemic. Magnets on their car, toys, things like that. If I see, sand pails and little bikes in the yard, that tells me that there are probably children there. They likely care about education or children's health, childcare, things like that. I want to have as much information about that voter going up to the door as possible. I always carry dog treats with me, and it's a really wonderful thing because it lets the folks at the door know that you are a dog person, or at least you care about dogs. Hopefully you are. But sometimes dogs can be very excited when we first answer the door, and that can be a little bit distracting for you, for their human. So a dog treat is a good way to give them something else to focus on. But please do always ask before sharing. Only ever had one person turn me down, and it was the dog walker, not the dog owner. And she told me that Mr. Jacques does not have his treats before 8 p.m. So, okay, all right, I'm sorry. Let's talk about no soliciting signs. Please do check the laws in your state. They might vary. I know for Arizona, political canvassing does not fall under the no soliciting purview or guidelines. So what I say here is this is about personal comfort. I do knock no soliciting doors. I know plenty of other people who don't, plenty of other candidates who don't knock no soliciting doors. It's truly what you're comfortable with. But my mentality is this: if it's a sign, and you'll see these, like no politics, no religion, don't come to this door unless you have Girl Scout cookies, I don't knock those. But if it's one of those tiny signs, that's, for me, I interpret that as someone telling me they don't want the solar salesman who goes door to door knocking on their door. But especially if you're a candidate on this call, or if you're canvassing in your direct neighborhood, you can say to them, oh, no, I'm not selling anything today. We're just out meeting neighbors. And in all the doors that I've knocked, I've only ever had two people kind of like, hey, there's a sign. And oh, no, I'm running to be your state house representative. And then after I won, oh, I'm here's your state house representative. I'm here to introduce myself. Or I'm a neighbor. We're just out talking to neighbors today, not selling you anything. That works too. But it's all down to your comfort level. And then finally, be aware in this era of Ring doorbells and increased security, you are always, always, always on camera. So if there's a door that maybe doesn't go as well, or something interesting happens at that door, you'd be surprised at how many folks answer when they've just gotten out of the shower or something like that. Wait to, if you have a friend and you want to talk about it with them, wait to do that until you're back on the sidewalk, back in the car, what have you. Be mindful that you're not walking on people's lawns or in their gravel, things like that. Just, you are a representative of the campaign or cause that you're there, and be very respectful of that at all times. Now, oftentimes the key to a successful interaction is just getting your foot in the door. Most people, I can count on one hand the number of bad doors that I've had. I've had doors that were quick. I've had doors that were awkward, that didn't quite go the way that I hoped. But the number of truly hostile doors, it's rare. People are skeptical more often than they're hostile. So it can help to just really get off on the right foot. So putting that person at ease and letting them know that this is going to be a positive interaction will really set you up for success. And again, smile, your body language and tone of your voice matters so much, especially if you're on the phone. This makes a big difference. So here are some couple ways you can introduce yourself. I'm a volunteer. I'm a friend of the candidate. Please only say that if it's true, but that really helps. I'm a fellow voter. And then my absolute favorite, I'm a neighbor. I consider everyone in my district a neighbor, so I use this one a lot, but this is especially useful if you are right in your exact neighborhood and you can say, oh, I live right over there. People really do like that, connecting with their community. So if they sound kind of rushed or uncertain, it's totally fine to say, oh, I won't take up too much of your time today. And then you just go, you just immediately dive right in. If they want you to leave or they don't have time to talk or it's just not the day for them, they will tell you. So worst case scenario, you only get a few seconds with them. At least then they hopefully hear the candidate's name or the cause that you're working on, which again is one of those touches. So let's dive in now to the persuasion toolbox. You've gotten your foot in the door, metaphorically speaking here. Let's talk about these 10 essential tools. Now, this is not a linear process. This is not, start here, A to B to C to D. You'll use some strategies and not others in each interaction. It just depends on the conversation. The goal is to give you a wide toolbox of tools to use throughout any conversation. However, they are presented in a hierarchy. So the heavy hitters, the most useful tools are the ones that I've put right up front. So let's start with this. Number one is investigate. You want to ask the voter what they care about. What are their priorities? How is this election going to impact their family? What are their kitchen table issues? And I'll pause here because this is a very information dense training, but we have a one-pager toolkit that you can kind of print out and take with you in the car or have next to you as your phone banking. And of course, we offer this multiple times. So if you'd like to take it again, there'll be an opportunity to do that through our organization, Civic Engagement Beyond Voting. And Kathy will put some resources in the chat for that. But you really want to listen and ask questions because you're trying to get at the story of their belief. And that can be really, really important information. So maybe this voter is a huge Second Amendment supporter because they were once the victim of a violent crime and owning a gun makes them feel safer. So the idea that someone could come and take their safety away from them is really frightening. But if you have that information, you can address public safety and reducing crime overall instead of that hot button idea of like taking guns away. In fact, you might find that you agree on many aspects of gun policy. Most Americans do, even gun owners. So you're still addressing their key concern. You're just doing so in a way that finds that common ground. So to do that, avoid yes or no questions. You want to ask open-ended things. Let's say they tell you healthcare is a big concern for them right now. You can say, yeah, me too. What are you seeing right now when you look at healthcare in our state? And go from there. So let's give you some specific examples of questions you can ask, and these will be in your toolkit. And I have these broken out from high information to a low information voter. And a great question is, how do you know the difference between a high information and a low information voter? You might not. And that's why many of these questions are designed for both. But generally, high information voters will be able to tell you, they'll be able to name policy areas that they're thinking about, that are on their mind, maybe even a local politician that they've heard of. So for example, if they tell you that they supported their, someone for the local school board last cycle, that's someone who's pretty involved in their community and in down ballot races. With lower information voters, what you tend to get is awkward silence, which we'll tackle on the next slide. But here are some questions you can ask. What's important to you and your family? If you could set the priorities for our state, what would they be? Now, some of these you'll see are specific to Arizona. Insert any kind of relevant policy, housing, climate, logging, whatever is relevant for your state. Some of these are Arizona specific. What do you think about vouchers in public education? What are your concerns for Arizona's water future? I'm sure that comes up in California. One I definitely know comes up in California. What do you think about the affordable housing crisis? And what do you think the state should do about reproductive health care? That's a big one in Arizona. Now, what you're doing with both the high information voter, but with particularly the lower information voter, is you're scaffolding. This is a teaching concept, and it just means you're structuring support. People know more than they think, and they want to share their thoughts. They just might need a little help to get started. And to that end, I really don't love the term low information voter. These are people who simply may not have made the connection between civics and their day-to-day lives, or they're just focused on other things. But when we can scaffold them and that more open-ended approach will help drive those connections. So things like, does your HOA drive you crazy? Are you tired of paying hospital facility fees? These are all local government issues. So you'll notice the first question is the same from this slide to the last one. What's important to you and your family? I love this question, especially for younger voters or for voters who are a little bit disengaged or disenchanted with the process. What do you wish politicians would talk about? I absolutely love that question. What do you hear from friends or see on the news or social media that worries you or interests you? And then here you're going to see a lot of scaffolding coming in. You're walking them through this policy. I know a lot of people are paying a lot for healthcare right now. What have your experiences with insurance companies been like? That's an easy one. I've yet to meet a single person in our entire country, I think, who loves their insurance company and has never had an issue with it and doesn't want to talk about that. Abortion has been a big topic for a lot of folks in the community. What do you think about reproductive health care? And again, plug in whatever is the most relevant issue in your state here. But what you're doing with this one is you're giving them a permission structure. You're saying, hey, you know, your neighbors are talking about this, your community's talking about this. Do you want to weigh in on that too? You're letting them know this is already something people are talking about. What are your thoughts? Now, investigating, validating, and the number 3 strategy will be your bread and butter. So be curious, meet the person where they're at. Never underestimate the power of telling someone, I feel that way too. This is one of the most important tools in our toolbox. Voters and human beings in general want to feel heard. Now, some voters may not speak to many people about politics. They may not speak to many people who aren't their same party or don't agree with them on certain issues about politics. You want to connect with them as fellow community members with shared goals for your state or for our country. Now, one of the most important pieces of advice that I can offer you is that empathizing with someone does not equal endorsing. Sometimes people will say things that kind of make your eyebrows go up. You can say, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I can see that this is really important to you. That doesn't mean that you agree with it. So it's really important as well to know your own triggers. If there are certain things that people talk about that you know just immediately raise your blood pressure, kind of keep that in mind. Just kind of know yourself, because again, sometimes voters will say things that will upset you, but we're not there to fight. So let it go. That's my best advice. And I love this GIF. It's perfect. Because not only do we all hear that song in our mind, especially if we have kids, kiddos, or grandkids, but she's walking up kind of a bridge, right? We're building bridges. And as Anand said in the video that I shared with you earlier, sometimes all you're doing is holding the bucket for that bile. It doesn't mean that you're agreeing with it or even engaging with it. So let's look at some examples of this. And I developed this training. I started it years ago, so you'll notice that some of these issues were very prescient in 2020. So someone says, I don't like social protests. You know, why do people vandalize? You can say, yeah, I hear you. It's upsetting. We can do better for everyone. So better may look like 2 really different things for you and that voter, but you can agree that better is needed. And that's a start. What you're doing here is you're meeting the person where they're at. You're finding those small things that you could agree on initially, because that increases the chances that you'll be able to discuss bigger things in a more productive way as that interaction goes on. You're building that foundation with trust and connecting with them on issues. Let's say they tell you, I work hard, other people are lazy, they want a free ride, they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We hear that all the time. Yeah, absolutely. Hard work is vital to success, and opportunity is key. Everyone should have an equal chance to thrive. You're really appealing to that sense of fairness in them. We get this one a lot in Arizona. We're a new battleground state, and boy, we sure are having growing pains with that in terms of the sheer number of ads and billboards and mailers and things like that. So you will absolutely get people who get really tired of that. And they'll tell you how sick they are of that. And I just let them know, you know, I kind of diffuse it with humor. If they're like, I'm so sick of this, I say, yeah, we sure do keep busy, you know, but it goes to show how important your vote is, especially here in Arizona. Finally, the last of the big 3 here, personal stories. And this is why you hear politicians say things like, I recently met a single mother in Michigan who's working 2 jobs, instead of the statistics about families living below the poverty line state X, Y, and Z, because one of those is much more impactful than the other. When I talk to people about public education, I might mention that Arizona is, you know, 48th, 49th in funding and that we're bottom of the barrel for just about every measure you can track. But the story that I tell them more often than that is the time that my classroom ceiling collapsed over my kindergartners as I was teaching. And I say, this is the state of public education in Arizona. That's really visceral. And someone can argue with me on funding and say, oh, well, it's enough and this and that. They can't argue with me about my ceiling collapsing. So the benefit of this strategy, sharing your own personal stories and trying to elicit some of theirs, is that if someone is inclined to argue with you, this makes it really hard for them to do so, because again, you're sharing something, you're sharing your own life experiences. So let's say they tell you something like water conservation is crucial, and you agree with that. Absolutely, we're validating that. As someone who grew up in the desert, I know how important it is for us to take care of our resources. Let's say they give you something and you don't really have a personal story for it. That's okay. That's where you use that as someone who. So they tell you, I'm retired, I'm on a fixed income, I'm really worried about healthcare costs. And you say, yeah, healthcare is so expensive. As someone with elderly parents, I know they're concerned about the cost of prescription drugs. And then something we face all the time, especially right now, people are disenchanted, understandably so, with politics. It's a rough environment out there sometimes. And so you'll get a lot of this. I might not vote. I don't care. It doesn't matter anyway. That's a place to really lean into your own experience with voting and why it's so important to you. You can say, yeah, as someone who used to feel like my voice didn't matter, it's been really exciting to learn that some people in government really do care. In fact, that's why the candidate wanted me to reach out to you, because they're listening. So personal stories really go a long way. Now, I want you to think to yourself, I just kind of how you would respond to this. So let's practice. We're going to practice those three: validate, investigate, personal story. And they can go in any order. So if someone says to you, my top issue is the economy, especially inflation, gas is so expensive. So how can you validate the concern that they're sharing with you? What's a question that you can ask this voter? And how do you connect with what the voter just said? How does it relate to your own life? So you can think that to yourself. If you'd like to put something in the chat, you're welcome to do that too. How I would respond to this voter is I would say, yeah, gosh, I hear you. I was at the grocery store the other day buying eggs to make a cake, and I just couldn't believe how expensive they are. What do you think we can do at the state level to make sure that, you know, everybody is that we're stretching your tax dollars as far as they can go, make sure everybody's taken care of? So you're validating what they're telling you, you're asking them a question, and you're sharing something personal. Yeah, I was at the store the other day trying to make a cake for my son's birthday, and oh gosh, I hear you. I hear you. That goes a long way. Number 4, we're going to keep going with our 10 here. This is a great one, especially if you're not the candidate yourself. It helps to really know the candidates. And there's a reason I put a puzzle piece on this slide, because by investigating, listening, and asking questions, you'll be able to match a voter's issue with a candidate's position. So I won't read both these examples, but let's say they tell you, we unfairly arrest too many people. And you can say, yeah, that's why we need to elect so-and-so. One of the reasons that I volunteer for him is the fact that he wants to reduce mandatory minimums for nonviolent crimes, and he's also against private prisons. So if you're phone banking or canvassing for one person regularly, maybe it's your local politician, you'll get to know them and be able to share these issues. A lot of times people feel intimidated to canvass because they don't know the candidate all that well. They've maybe met them once, they have a piece of literature to take to the doors. But there's an easy out for that. And again, it goes back to your why. Let's say you're supporting someone who you really agree with their policy on climate change, and someone asks you a question at the door that has nothing to do with that. You have no idea how that candidate would respond. You can say, that's a great question. There's contact information on their website here. You know, you'll have a piece of literature to hand to them. I'm volunteering for so-and-so today because I really like what they're doing to ensure more sustainable, more sustainability. So you're letting them know, I don't have to have all the answers to that. You don't have to know every single policy piece of a candidate, but if you do, or you do know them well, it can be really helpful. Okay, pivot to input. Sometimes voters might stump you. This happens all the time. And again, I talked about this on the last slide. You don't have to have all the answers. We are all on the same team here. Sometimes it feels like we have to defend every single position that someone might ask us about, and the reality is we don't. Democracy is a work in progress. Democracy is not a spectator sport, like the saying goes. It takes all of us. And we're tapping into that when we're asking someone, well, how would you solve that crisis? Or how would you solve this issue? So let's say that they tell you, I hate politics, all politicians are corrupt. And your tendency, your reaction might be, no, but this is my friend, they're great, and et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to do that. I mean, you can, but you can also say, yeah, I agree. There, you're validating them. I agree. It's frustrating to see so much money in politics. What do you think we can do to elect better people into office? Or if they tell you that healthcare is so hopelessly broken, acknowledge that. Again, you'll start to see how some of these strategies weave together. Yeah, we definitely have our work cut out for us. If you were in charge, where would you start? And I'll give you an example of this that happened just the other day. My partner is running for Phoenix City Council, and we were at a door, and the voter was immediately unhappy. This is one of the handful of doors that I can categorize as being really, really hostile. And they were saying, there's this high rise going in over here, and you don't know anything about that. And there's this happening, and you don't know anything about that. And they were, it was immediate. And this goes on for a minute. And then I said to that voter, I said, you know what? I am so glad we're here. We know kind of what's going on in our community, but this district is so big, and we really depend on these conversations, like, and what you're telling us, so that we can know what's happening in your community to be able to work to address that. And it was like the air came out of a balloon. I mean, her demeanor completely shifted, and we had a great conversation. But I mean, genuinely, like, that's why we're there, to hear about people's issues. And what do you think we can do about that? So let's think about this one here. I want to give you another chance to practice, even if it's just to yourself. Let's say the voter tells you, infrastructure is important. We need criminal justice reform. I also want strong borders, but I hate both parties. No one ever gets anything done. So I chose this example specifically because this voter is giving you a grab bag, right? Like, they are all over the place on all kinds of issues here. You'll get that. You'll hear that. So the two things that I want you to think about: validating what they said and pivoting to input. So how can you let the voter know that you agree with some or all of what they said? And then how can you ask the voter for their opinion on a good solution? So I might say to them something like, yeah, I hear a lot of frustration. I hear from your neighbors a lot of frustration. I hear from community members just a lot of frustration right now at the way things are going. I hear you. What do you think we can do? What can I do when I'm elected into office, or when I'm in office? What can this candidate do for you that would make you feel like things are getting done? So something like that. Or infrastructure. Structure is always a great one. Yeah, absolutely. We need to invest in infrastructure. Where do you see that we have the highest need for that in your community? Things like that. Now, our number 6 value, or our number 6 tool here, is shared values. Focus on that common ground, and really, we share more than we think. In Arizona, something that comes up all the time, especially now, is immigration and the border. So let's say they tell you, oh, this immigration system, it isn't right. Too many people can come in. Yeah, it sounds like we both care about making sure the system is fair. Again, I go back to that video we watched from Anand. You're appealing to their sense of justice and fairness, opening it up for hopefully a larger conversation. Let's say they tell you, I don't know about how much we spend on schools. Maybe it's a little too much, but I do know that it's important that we get people into good jobs. And say, yeah, absolutely. I think we're on the same page here. This candidate that I'm volunteering for today, they really want to ensure strong workforce development, and a huge part of that is prioritizing our education system. So again, you'll notice here that strategies are really woven together, and this will come more and more naturally the more that you do it. Because here, again, you're validating. You're going to do that in almost every single conversation. You know the candidate. You're letting them know, hey, they prioritize workforce development. And then you're touching on how we all know that education helps set everyone in society up for success. So I am going to go through the next two slides really quickly because they're Arizona specific, but the reason that I decided to leave them in is because I think you'll see that a lot of these statements would likely be supported broadly in your state too. So Arizonans support more quality jobs and a secure water supply. I mean, look at some of these percentages. 92% of Arizonans want to make sure that we're protecting our rivers, natural areas, and wildlife. I would imagine it's very similar percentages in your state as well. We agree on affordable healthcare and we agree on quality K-12 education. Again, these are all of them at nearly 80% and above. So I just wanted to highlight these briefly. Again, they're Arizona specific, but this was a Gallup poll. Gallup is a very reputable polling firm. So if you have a chance to Google what some of the really strong high polling issues are in your state, I would encourage you to do so because it can open up more space for conversation. Now, it also helps to define the stakes because voters just may not be aware of how much elections and particularly local elections impact their day-to-day lives. So I get this a lot, like, oh, I don't pay attention to local politics, federal elections matter more. And I want to validate that because that's true. They certainly do matter quite a bit. I say, yeah, you're right. Federal elections are so important. You know, as a voter, I also want to give local lawmakers my input because they determine school funding. And I have two kids in elementary school. I want them to have low class sizes. Or if they tell you, oh, I don't really care about politics, again, that apathy, you really do see it. You'd say, yeah, I wasn't either until I realized that the state legislature sets a $16 billion budget. I've worked hard as a nurse for 20 years and I want to know how they spend my tax dollars. Now in California, someone please do put in the chat, I would imagine that your budget is a little higher than ours at 16. Our total budget is about 44, but I still imagine yours is quite a bit higher. So again, you'll notice with this that strategies are woven together because in both of these examples, you are validating and you're telling a personal story. You're talking about the two kids in elementary school and the 20-year nurse. It connects with people with how local politics impact them in significant ways every single day. So to that end, here are just some of the things that local governments do, from your school board all the way up to your General Assembly, your state assembly. They control school funding, they develop education standards and set curriculum for students, they oversee the criminal justice system, review land use and set zoning policy that is particularly impactful when it comes to housing. They determine state taxes and the state healthcare programs, police, fire, other social services, that's all local government, caring for roads, industry and intrastate commerce. Again, most of you are in California. I imagine that is hugely important for your state. They oversee elections and voting. That's a big one. And they establish generally your water use and long-term water use future. And if you hear background noise, that's just my cat desperately trying to get into this room. We'll see if he figures out how to open the door by the end. But number 8 is being a voter guide. And this is especially helpful the closer you get to the election. So in those couple of weeks before the primary and before the general, people need help. It can be a really overwhelming process to navigate, especially for new voters or young voters. They will have questions about the process. So it can be really helpful to familiarize yourself with how to register to vote, where to vote, important dates and deadlines, and then a resource to give them for in-depth voting questions. We have a great one that's specific to Maricopa County in Arizona. There's also iwillvote.com. If you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, Kathy, that's a general resource. If you have California specific or other websites that you've used, please do put those in the chat because they're so helpful. You don't necessarily have to have all of the answers yourself, but being able to refer them to, hey, I have this great website. This can tell you your nearest voting location and the hours. You know, that's something that you'll get asked pretty frequently, especially at the end. Okay, facts and statistics. There is a reason that I put this down on number 9, friends, and that's because this is just not, I almost never use this at the doors because as human beings, we are naturally pretty suspicious of facts and information coming from someone we don't know. First impressions are strong, as are issues with a lot of emotion involved, and numbers, as much as we want them to, as much as we think, oh, if they just knew the data, it's just not that simple. So use this really sparingly. And the key phrases here are, would you be interested to know, or what would you think about X? So let's say you're talking about gun policy and they say, I don't think we need to close gun law loopholes because that is government overreach. You're going to ask them a question. You remember, we're kind of pivoting to input with them as well. What would you think about gun laws that are designed to keep people safe from criminal violence? 2/3 of women murdered by an intimate partner are killed by a gun. And again, if you have a personal story with domestic violence or anything like that, this would be a good place to use it. The government isn't doing enough about homelessness. It's a drug issue. We get that a lot in Arizona. Acknowledge that. You could say, yeah, substance abuse treatment is a part of the solution. Absolutely. Validate that feeling. Would you be interested to know that in Arizona, the #1 cause of homelessness is a lack of affordable housing? And my candidate here that I'm volunteering for, they're working on addressing that issue. So even with these 2 examples that I gave you, I would call these like statistics light. It's just it's an easier way for people to grasp onto these numbers. Okay, number 10. This is your break glass in case of emergency strategy, acknowledging differences. We win and we govern by finding common ground and building coalitions, but there are some issues that are just people can this is my issue, this is my one issue, and they're not moving from that. Things like election denialism, gun policy can fall into this, vaccines, abortion, they can all fall into this category. Again, this is Arizona specific, but many of you have heard of Kari Lake here. So let's say the voter tells you, I think there was cheating in the last 2 elections. Does your candidate believe that Trump and Lake won? Acknowledge that. No, it sounds like that won't be an area of agreement. However, this candidate does support greater transparency and investing in smart technology to maintain secure elections. So you're still trying to reach that voter and still trying to find that common ground, but being honest about, no, this is just an area we're not going to agree on. And sometimes that ends the conversation, and that's okay too. Anytime you're getting data for your campaign, it's a good thing, because then that campaign knows that this is not a voter that I'm going to get, can work on moving to other people who may be more persuadable. My absolute favorite voting advice that I have ever heard is this. Voting isn't marriage, it's public transportation. You're not waiting for the one who is absolutely perfect. You're getting the bus. And if there isn't one going right to your destination, you don't not travel, you take the one that's going the closest. So I'll end this slide with letting you know that there's a great kind of exit phrase from this one, which is also, maybe there's another area where the candidate can earn your support. If you just want to try to move off of that and go on to something else, you can try that. But sometimes this will end the conversation. That's true. Now, if it doesn't, you want to end with an ask, and you will have information in front of you from an app. Generally, it's the VAN, the Voter Activation Network, with a script. They'll let you know which doors to go to. Generally, you'll be ending with an ask, and they'll have that in the app that you're using. But it's things like this. Would you consider supporting this candidate or this cause in November? Or kind of the little stronger version of that ask is, can this candidate count on your vote in November? And there'll be a way for you to log that data. Lots of people will be undecided at the end of an interaction. They might say that they need to do more research. That's great. We want informed voters. So you validate that. Yeah, of course, here's the website. And would you like me to ask the candidate to get in touch with you? But there's a little star there. Please do confirm that with the campaign before offering this option. I don't know that any of our statewide Senate candidates or gubernatorial candidates will be able to get in touch with them personally. But if it's, a school board, city council, general assembly, oftentimes, yeah, they love to chat with their voters. Other tips, and then we'll have a few minutes right at the end of our hour for questions, and then I'll be able to stay on until 7. If you are able to stick around as well for questions, I'm happy to answer those, but I want to leave you with some other tips here. So again, voters stump you. This happens all the time. If you need time to think, a great strategy is to repeat that question back to them. There's a really well-known example of this that you can look up on YouTube, and it's from a number of years ago. It's Beto O'Rourke being asked the question about whether or not football players kneeling during the national anthem is disrespectful to the military. And he takes almost 30 full seconds to restate that conversation. He wanted everyone in the room to hear it. but he also wanted to give himself time, I think, to really formulate a very thoughtful response. So you can say things like, well, if I'm hearing you correctly, or I want to make sure I understand your question, and then repeat it back to them by yourself a couple of seconds. Now, use your intuition. The goal is a quality conversation. And to that end, it is okay to leave at any time if you don't feel comfortable or it's not going well. You don't have to, if they're handing you all that bile and it is just too much or it is just not going well, that's okay. You can turn around and go, just thank them. Okay, thank you for your time, and walk away. And one of the most important things you can do if that happens is to shake it off. There will be, times where a door or even an entire turf, your little, cut of 30 or so houses, there are times the doors or even entire turfs do not go well. I've had that happen all the time. There are turfs that you knock that no one answers the door. It's rare, but it does happen. Don't let that discourage you, because your next great interaction is just right around the corner, but you have to keep knocking to get it. It helps to set a goal. In a 2-hour shift, if you're outdoor knocking, that's approximately 30 to 40 doors, or if you're phone banking, it's usually about 60 to 80 calls. I say approximately because it depends on how dense your turf is, how close the houses are together, the types of voters that you're talking to. Like, depending on where I am in my district, it's like dem, right down a line. I'm only talking to them during get out the vote. When it switches to the more persuasion universe, you might be much more spread out. So it just depends on the district and where you are in the campaign. Contact rates are generally about 10 to 30%. So know that when you're outdoor knocking, you'll talk to roughly 1 out of 3 voters. Again, it can be higher. I don't think I've ever seen a contact rate on a decent sized turf higher than like 50%. Not many people answer their doors these days, especially if they have a ring, because they think, why is that person there? So it's good to leave a note and leave the literature that you're there to deliver and talk about. It can really help to gamify it, especially if you're phone banking, doing little tally marks, things like that. Treats are very helpful. Candy or a snack for every 10 calls or doors or so can help to take a break in the car, or if you're at home phone banking, listen to a favorite song or stretch every 20 calls or doors or so. Advocacy buddies help. They help tremendously. This can be friendly competition or someone who goes to every single door with you. That's okay too. So who can make the most calls in a 2-hour shift? Who can canvass more people in a day? And then finally, adopt a race or a cause, because if you do volunteer regularly, you'll get to know the voters in that area, the issues in that district, if it's not your own. And that will help you feel comfortable, which is truly, truly the key to success. If I can leave you with one thing about canvassing, it's that your confidence, your ease, your positive attitude is what sets the tone for this and what will make you successful. You don't have to be incredibly experienced. You just have to have a smile on your face and be ready to knock some doors. So with that, time for questions in the last 5 minutes or so. But again, I'm happy to stay on if there are strategies you've used before, strategies you're interested in trying, or other things that you'd like to ask. We'll see if you can stump me the way that voters sometimes stump you at the doors. Kathy, any questions that you wanted to flag for me in the chat as we wrap up here?
Yeah, absolutely. There were a few